The global oil trade is a complex web of dangerous maritime choke points where the United States and Russia fight for total economic control. Right now, a massive geopolitical war is unfolding across our oceans that directly determines how much you pay for fuel and daily food items. You might not realize it, but your monthly bank statement is heavily impacted by secretive cargo ships moving through highly contested international waters. There is a hidden architectural flaw in the global energy supply network that world powers have quietly exploited for billions of dollars over decades. I break down one critical psychological or economic concept per video in plain language so you can understand how the modern world works. If you want to understand the deep forces that shape international wealth and individual survival, then you should definitely subscribe and turn on notifications. To truly understand this economic battle, we must first examine the single most vulnerable maritime bottleneck on Earth, which dictates global energy prices daily. This legendary pressure point is the Strait of Hormuz, where roughly 20 million barrels of crude oil try to pass through every single day. When conflict erupted earlier this year, shipping traffic plunged to an absolute trickle, causing North Sea-dated crude prices to spike to $130. What most people never realize is that a simple block here triggers an immediate financial shockwave that hits working-class families across the globe. Your brain did not evolve to calculate how a naval standoff thousands of miles away changes the baseline cost of your local supermarket groceries. While the United States relies on domestic shale production to cushion these shocks, Russia uses the chaos to maximize its own energy export revenues. Before I reveal the highly counterintuitive strategy Russia uses to bypass these Western blockades, we must look at how the supply lines are drawn. The United States has surged its production to historic highs, while non-OPEC supply grew by over 1 million barrels per day this year. This massive American energy boom allows Washington to use economic sanctions as a weapon to restrict how rival nations can trade their resources. But here is the part that researchers themselves found shocking when they looked closely at the international maritime shipping data during recent months. Despite heavy sanctions, Russia managed to push its fossil fuel export revenues to an impressive 734 million euros per day by April of 2026. The specific psychological and strategic concept behind this survival is called the shadow fleet economy, and once you see it everywhere. Instead of using standard Western-insured tankers, Moscow assembled an informal dark fleet of aging vessels operating completely outside of conventional maritime laws. Recent data confirms that 48% of all seaborne Russian crude oil is currently transported by these unauthorized, sanctioned shadow tankers. European naval forces recently escalated their campaign by seizing 9 of these dark tankers, including a vessel carrying $30 million of oil. These ships frequently engage in dangerous maneuvers, like disabling their automated identification systems and falsifying their registration flags to avoid Allied detection. If you look at the major buyers, you will find that China purchased 49% of Russia's crude, followed closely by India. Think about the last time you bought gas and realize that a portion of that oil likely traveled through this exact global cat and mouse game. This brings us directly to the second massive bottleneck known as the Strait of Malacca, which serves as Asia's primary economic lifeline. Over 23 million barrels of oil flow through this narrow corridor every day, making it the largest volume choke point on Earth today. The United States military maintains a strategic presence near this waterway to guarantee open trade while quietly holding an economic lever over China. Because China relies so heavily on this route, any potential blockade here would instantly paralyze their massive industrial manufacturing infrastructure within days. To mitigate this extreme vulnerability, Beijing has drastically increased its direct land-based energy imports from Russian pipelines, like the vast Druzhba network. Russian pipeline crude exports surged by 22% recently after operations resumed following a long period of technical and political inactivity. Stay with me because what I am about to show you in the next 2 minutes is the part that changes everything completely. While Western nations publicly celebrate their strict bans on Russian energy, they are secretly buying processed fuel from countries that import Moscow's crude. Complex international refineries buy discounted Russian oil, mix it with other supplies, and then legally export the finished gasoline directly to Europe. This means the global energy network is highly fluid, and trying to completely block one major producer is almost mathematically impossible in reality. Even Saudi Arabia's western ports saw a massive surge in Russian refined fuel imports, which they used for their own domestic power grids. This entire dynamic represents the dark reveal of modern geopolitics, where public political rhetoric rarely matches the cold reality of resource transactions. Now look at the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, where recent military escalations forced international energy shipments to plummet by more than 50% overall. Tankers carrying 4.2 million barrels of oil per day had to completely abandon this route to protect their highly valuable commercial cargo. To prevent a global economic collapse, the International Energy Agency launched an unprecedented emergency stock release of 400 million total barrels. This massive injection of crude oil brought 2.5 million additional barrels per day into the global market to stabilize unstable international prices. Meanwhile, major shipping giants chose to redirect their fleets around the Cape of Good Hope, which adds 12 long days to standard transit times. This massive detour burns hundreds of thousands of tons of extra marine fuel and adds millions in overhead costs to global shipping logistics. Russia capitalizes on this structural stress by providing shorter, safer rail and pipeline alternatives through their secure, vast northern land territories. The northern sea route across the melting Arctic is turning into a major strategic corridor that the United States cannot easily monitor or control. This gives Moscow an enormous competitive advantage because they can deliver essential crude to Asian ports much faster than any traditional sea route. Washington is actively trying to counter this geopolitical leverage by expanding its own diplomatic and financial influence over vital deep-water global ports. Stock markets across the globe fluctuate violently based entirely on satellite imagery tracking where these massive shadow tankers are currently loading their cargo. Sophisticated hedge funds spend millions of dollars buying advanced tracking software to guess how oil supplies will shift during these maritime crises. The actual value of the modern US dollar is deeply tethered to this constant global flow of energy, which is why choke points matter so much. If the United States loses its structural dominance over these trade lanes, its ability to enforce international financial sanctions will completely evaporate overnight. This is the naval presence in the South China Sea and the Mediterranean is treated as a matter of absolute national security by Washington. Russia knows this vulnerability very well and continues to build alternative non-dollar payment systems to permanently decouple its trade from Western control. They are creating a brand new financial framework with major global partners to ensure that oil can be bought and sold without any US tracking. Once this shadow financial system matures completely, the economic weapons currently used by the Western world will lose their ultimate power and effectiveness. The global superpower conflict is no longer fought just with armies, but through the strategic manipulation of these narrow ocean corridors and ports. Whoever controls the infrastructure and the dark shipping networks ultimately dictates which economies will flourish and which ones will collapse under pressure. So let us pull this entire picture together to understand how these forces interact to govern the modern world you live in. We learned how the Strait of Hormuz remains the ultimate economic trigger capable of driving global crude oil prices beyond manageable limits instantly. We saw how Russia utilizes an elusive shadow fleet of unsanctioned vessels to successfully bypass Western banking blocs and supply major Asian markets. Share this video with one person who deserves to understand how international energy routes secretly control the money in your own pocket.